The quantities were vast. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax. Shut down.
So the question you have to ask yourself is, if the evidence was so flimsy, why did Powell get up and make such an unequivocal case that Iraq had WMD and was an imminent threat? And the reason is that there was tremendous pressure inside and outside the administration to make that argument. And the question is, who was creating that pressure? And the answer is, it was the neoconservatives, almost single-handedly.
Dick Cheney and his minions have brought, and Richard Pearl is one of his minions, and Doug Feith is one of his minions, have brought the art of lying to a new scale, a new level. Was oil the #1 influence on President Bush and Vice President Cheney? Or was WMD? Or was spreading democracy? And don't believe it for a moment. They didn't even think about spreading democracy when they started this war. They transmogrified the mission into starting or democracy simply to appease the American people and to give them some reason to support the war. You have to decide, where were these factors? And inevitably, the Jewish lobby in America, AIPAC in particular, the focus lobby, has got to be there. You're being naive if you don't put that factor up there as an influence on national security decision-making, particularly with the Bush administration. The AIPAC lobby is very influential through Vice President Cheney, very influential, and through people like Elliott Abrams, Paul Wolfowitz, and a host of others within the government.
And of course, you don't want to lose sight of the fact that the Israeli government was also feeding the United States government intelligence, which said that Iraq had a serious WMD capability and was an imminent threat. There's an Israeli general named Shlomo Bram who has written a piece on this, which says, in effect, that Israel was a full partner in this scheme to convince the public in the United States and around the globe that Iraq was an imminent threat. Iraq was not an imminent threat. The fact is that even if Saddam had had nuclear weapons, there was nothing you could do with them, right? But you could not make those arguments at the time in the United States. It was very, very hard to get them out into the public domain and for them to get any traction.
Do you agree with Mearsheimer and Wool that the influence of the pro-Israel lobby was important for going to war with Iraq?
I do, but I would not have presented it the way they did, because I think that they underestimate ideas and they underestimate, if you like, emotions. They're very cold and realistic in their view of politics. And for them, since the going to war with Iraq is absolutely crazy, and it was pretty obviously crazy for many of us before, there must have been some pressure to do something so irrational. And of course there was, but they underestimate other factors. The illusion, for example, that we could have control of Iraq's oil and of the strategic region. The belief, which is a deep American belief, which was not invented by the Jewish lobby, that America knows how democracy should work and is an example to the world and has a moral duty and certainly a right to bring this example to the world. And it's all mixed together. So ideals, belief about American exceptionalism, American duties, American provincialism, not knowing about what's going on outside, and Israeli pressure. Yes.
The suggestion that that the Israeli lobby, as he describes it, is in effect operated by the Israelis and reflects Israeli preferences is simply wrong and can be shown to be wrong.
So you don't feel part of the Israeli lobby?
No, I'm not part of an Israeli lobby. I have my own views. I'm sympathetic to Israel, as most Americans are sympathetic to Israel. I'm not incapable of being critical of an Israeli policy that I don't like. But the main point is that it is not the Israeli government that shapes the thinking of Americans who are pro-Israeli.
Richard Pearl would probably say, in response to your question, if you got the truth out of them, Israel's interests and America's interests are the same. And so if I'm an advocate for Israel's interest, I'm an advocate for America's interest. And I would say back to them, again as a strategist, bullshit. No two countries in history, and no two countries in the future in history, I will predict, will ever have coincidental national interest all the time. No way.
I don't want to kind of develop this great sense of victimhood, but I do feel, and it's, you know, I come here and I feel that we in Israel have paid the price. American Jews, surprise, surprise, are liberal Democrats when it comes to most issues, including the Middle East. So when you poll American Jews, they're for the peace process and they're for American engagement and they're for a two-state solution. And we did the Geneva Initiative and they were in favor of that as well. But the institutional, organized leadership of the community has kind of taken things in a very different direction. And I do feel that for their own reasons, reasons that I understand, reasons that are not unique to the Jewish diaspora in America, reasons that are prevalent in many diaspora politics around the world. It's to do with my identity in a diaspora, it's to do partially with guilt, it's to do with my own political role in my new host community, etc., etc. They've driven so-called pro-Israel politics in Washington in a direction which is directly antithetical to what is good for Israel. In that respect, yes, I do feel we paid a price. Of course, that has been increased manyfold under the current administration.
America has become part of the Israeli victim narrative. It began, I think, in the 70s, when one of the ways in which the African-American community could begin to get amends for slavery and the consequences of slavery was by emphasizing that it was a victim of history. That even if you didn't do it, history did it. Your grandparents did it. It's not a personal responsibility, but there's a cultural debt. And the Holocaust, of course, is the ultimate victim narrative. And David Ben-Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, knew this very well because he turned it to advantage, giving Israel as a whole country a victim narrative. If you can't criticize someone because he himself is a victim, what do you do with a whole country, which is a country born of victimhood, so to speak? I have been in conversations many times with people who are very reasonable and would say, yes, you're right, Israel does do bad things. The occupied territories, stealing the water, stealing the land, bombing the houses, etc. But remember what happened to the Jews. There is a background, there is a history, there is a reason, there is an excuse for this. And of course, you can say the same thing for the Palestinians. Remember what happened to the Palestinians after the Nakba in 1948 and so on, 1967. No wonder they have suicide bombers. You can always do this. There's always a relationship between collective past suffering and present individual actions. To turn that into public policy, though, is catastrophic, and that is what we see today.
The what if. The what if this particular view of the Israeli interest and of the shared Israeli-American interest, which of course someone like myself would see as absolutely antithetical to my understanding of Israel's interests. If that particular view is continued to be bulldozed onto the American public and political leadership, what if there's a backlash? And the kind of backlash that I think can be envisaged is the kind of backlash whereby eventually enough of the American public, and eventually by extension their elected public officials, turn round and say, we need to disengage from our overstretch in the Middle East.
Could be that as a consequence of what happens in Iraq and what happens in Iran, that people become very angry with our relationship with Israel, and there's just an upsurge of public opinion. It could be that you have 2 or 3 senators who come out and make a very forceful case for changing our policy.
It just isn't going to happen. It is not going to happen. And you could eliminate by some waving a magic wand, you could eliminate the Israeli lobby that Walt and Mearsheimer talk about, and everything I've said would continue to be true.
I will make a prediction. If this president orders us to go to war in Iran in the next 2 years, and he orders any considerable ground component to participate in that, Marines or Army, then I think you're going to see another major exodus from the armed forces, general officers, because I think they understand just how colossally wrong such a decision would be, and how much that would be the precursor for, call it what you will, World War III, World War IV.
Remember the Roman Empire. For a long, long time, the state of Judea behaved in ways which annoyed the Romans but didn't do them any harm. At the point at which they were becoming a nuisance, the Romans turned against them, destroyed their temple, wiped them out, and told them, an empire has bigger concerns than you. This is what Israel faces in the next 25 years. The risk that the American empire will say, wait a minute, you don't matter to us so much. Either because we need oil more than we need you, or because oil is no longer important. Doesn't matter, both is the same effect. You are more trouble than you are worth, and the issue of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is declining with the demographic move to the next generation. This is a catastrophe for Israel, because Israel has no other friends in the world.